Crackdown 2 is definitely bad. EHG, this is how bad is it? Crackdown 2. Now, if you've watched my previous videos with how bad is it, it has to meet one of 3 criteria to fall into this type of gameplay video, which is the game was hated by critics, the game was hated by the community, or the game was hated by me. This falls into the latter. I remember not liking Crackdown 2, like despising it, but it was so long ago I couldn't remember why. So as I just played through the original Crackdown right before I played through this, I went into it knowing very little about it. I didn't remember anything about it except for that it used the same map as the first game, more or less. Other than that, didn't remember. Okay, now I break this down into things that I think are pros for the game, things that are subjective, they're not really pros or cons, and then the cons. As we have it listed off here, I have 2 pros about the game. I have 2 subjective things, which are neither pros nor cons, and then I have 17 cons. Alright, let's jump into the first pro. There's minor graphical improvements in this game, especially regarding the vegetation on the ground and something that you're going to be looking at here. The LOD, or level of detail, which specifically for the old consoles, which didn't have a lot of memory. Usually, objects in the distance or environment, structures, buildings looked very bad in comparison to ones that were closer to you because they were getting more graphical memory, more resources, the closer they were to you. In this game, I don't know exactly what they did. Let me fast forward this a little bit. But that right there, as you take a look at the city in the background, it almost kind of looks like a hand-drawn painting as compared to a digital map with very little levels of detail. Like, go back and watch the original Crackdown videos. When you look at the map from a distance, it does not look very good. Here, it looks quite artistic, and I do believe from this era, this may be one of the only games I've ever seen done this. That was a really cool trick they did. The second plus. Co-op could be fun. I personally never found these games to be fun playing co-op, but if you're that type of person, then you could get some enjoyment out of playing these with co-op. I always just kind of like to blow through the game myself solo, but I mean, if that's your thing, then it's definitely a plus. The first subjective. The weapon unlock system. In the first game, you had to pick up a weapon from the enemies, take it to the supply point, and then it would be available for you to use. In this game, you unlock certain weapons just through upgrading your firearm skills or your explosive skills. You also unlock certain vehicles from upgrading your driving skills, but I'm not getting into that. The other way you unlock the weapon system is the traditional way, by picking up something and taking it to the supply point. I didn't really care for the unlocking things as you upped your firearm skills because they completely redid how the firearms acted in this game. I wasn't a big fan of the change, but if you like unlocking weapons with upgrading your firearm skills, you know, it's hard to argue against that, so entirely subjective. The second thing. Day and night in this game, as there was day and night cycles in the first game, so is here. But unlike the first game, there's differences to the day and night cycles. At nighttime, you're going to see more freaks pop out, stuff like that. During the daytime, the freaks disappear because they can't be in the sunlight. And there's an increased enemy presence. I think it's at nighttime during this game. I didn't feel it made any difference either way. You're going to be shooting lots of baddies. Take it for what you will. Now we're going to be getting into the cons, or the negatives. All 17 of them. Yeah, that's the most I've ever had for any game that I've done How Bad Is It on, by far. The first one, number 1, it feels rushed. I don't know if this is specifically the story, but it feels like Microsoft, the publisher, wanted a studio to throw out another Crackdown game out there for cash, and just wanted to slap it together as quickly as possible. They probably had a limited time frame, or at least that's what I'm getting, since they recycled so many assets and added so few things of value. It just feels rushed. Number 2. The story is a poor ripoff of the first game. The first game didn't really have so much of a story. They started it off with what happened to the city, and then at the end there was a big reveal, huge reveal, which I didn't really understand at the time when I first played it, but today it's quite big. Here what they did is pretty much just ripped off the ending from the first game, which is entirely predictable because in the first game they pulled it off without any lead up to it. You had no idea what was coming. They just smacked you with it and you're like, what the hell? Really? In this game you saw it coming. So they didn't do a good job with that. Negative number 3. One of the activities, or yeah, I guess I could call it an activity since it's not part of the main mission. There's 3 main activities in this game. There's the sunburst, there's recapturing tactical points, and there's these things called freak breaches, which you're seeing right now. They can only be done at night. There's no way to, let's just say Skyrim style or Fallout 3, advance the game time to whenever you want. So if you want to close up all these freak breaches for a completionist playthrough, you pretty much have to sit there with your thumb up your ass during the daytime, unless you manage your time meticulously and, collect orbs during the day, stuff like that. I didn't do that. I just did whatever sought my eye, whatever my eye caught, I did it. And then you got all these freak breaches open later on in the game that you can only do at nighttime, and if you bust ass, or I should say haul ass, you can maybe do 4 a night. But like I said, during the day, you're just standing there, waiting for nighttime to roll around so you can finish up your activity. That was a really stupid design feature on their part. Negative number 4. Voice of agency voice lines. The guy that's always butting in to say his 2 cents, the voice of the agency. They're repetitive, and they're so constant that they just become endlessly irritating. Now, when I get into some of the other cons later on, this plays a very, very big role just because you get so sick of hearing his voice. It's almost like a nagging nanny. Negative number 5. Climbing is worse than the first game. Your agent constantly fails to grab ledges. This wasn't a problem in the first game. In fact, I don't recall having a problem with it in Crackdown 1 at all. Like, period, none. But in this game, there's certain areas that you have to get up to, like the last, or the second to last, agency supply point I had to capture from Cell. I had to go all the way up to the top, or close to the top of what was Shigen Tower from the first game. And you can't climb it like you climb most stuff in the first game. There's a lot of Uncharted style hand ledges or hand grips that you have to grab onto. And your agent doesn't always manage to grab onto them. I don't know why that is. It seems like you have to press up on the left thumbstick for him to grab onto it, and even sometimes he just lets it go. That makes climbing these types of towers endlessly irritating in this game, and that's not an isolated incident either. You're going to be running into that all the time. Negative 6. Collectible audio logs often contradict the agent's job. Now this gets into what I said about this game having a bad story. You'll pick up a lot of different things from either agency whistleblowers or the cell leader, which generally sounds like a good person in this game. And the agents out there doing the agency thing, which the agency in this game is a direct analog for like intelligence agencies in general that do not do good things. It just feels a little weird how the agent that you're in control of can pick all this shit up and just never stop to have a little think about what he's doing. It just feels a little strange. Negative 7. Frame rate gets terrible later on. Yeah, later on once you level up your explosives and the game puts a lot of enemies on screen, a lot of AI civilians, NPCs, stuff like that, vehicles, cars, things that you can shoot with your weapon that blow up like explosive barrels, stuff like that. The game's just littered with them. And when you level up your explosive skills and you start throwing grenades, which are pretty much like nukes at the end, which is pretty awesome, but when there's a lot of chaos, it murders the frame rate. And I'm talking maybe 12 frames per second sometimes, especially during some of these sunburst events, which you see on screen now. My frame rate got so bad I could barely control the character. Barely. Died multiple times because of it. They should have toned down the particle effects, the number of enemies on screen, all that stuff to try to keep the... I would say even in the mid to high 20s would have been acceptable, but the frame rate just gets bad. Very bad. -8. Game design. Capturing supply points in populated areas always leads to hostile peacekeepers. As I said with the previous complaint, there's lots of civilians on screen, NPCs, stuff like that. And you can see it, like, right now I'm just using firearms, but later on in the game, once you get to the more difficult areas, which, especially around where Shigen was in the first game, you're up against a lot of really difficult enemies that throw a lot of explosives at you, so the best way to dispatch them in return is to use explosives, since they're so overpowered in this game. But there's always a bunch of agency peacekeepers that come around. There's always a bunch of civilians on the street when you try to recapture these checkpoints. And it results with a lot of civilian deaths, or a lot of peacekeeper deaths, and then you constantly have the voice of the agency on there, nagging you about civilian casualties and blah blah blah. Well, you can't avoid them at this point. To say it's annoying, and then the peacekeepers start shooting back at you, which is another issue unto itself when you already have all these guys shooting at you. It's just a whole bag of bad design. -9. Voice of agency voice lines are juvenile and misfitting. Voice of the agency didn't speak all that much in the first game. He threw his 2 cents in every now and then, but other than that, he didn't speak a whole hell of a lot. Pretty much only when necessary to advance maybe what was going on screen, or to advance the narrative. In this game, he never shuts up. I mean, never. And a lot of the stuff he says, like, when you come across the chase me orbs, as I call them, it just sounds stupid. He doesn't sound like the authoritarian voice of the agency, you know, the ultimate dictator, the archetype of, you know, evil, which he's supposed to be. He just kind of sounds like a frat boy. It's really weird and off-putting. -10. This is a big one. This is a big one. This was the crux of most of my complaints. The replacements for the generals and the kingpins were not good. If you played Crackdown 1, you'd know that the entire game was based around taking down generals en route to take down a kingpin. Or you could say, fuck it, I'm going straight for the kingpin, and do that, which I did in my Crackdown video. With the Volk, I just went straight for the kingpin. It wasn't as hard as I thought. But there ain't any of that in this game. Instead, they replaced all the generals and the kingpin, and that entire dynamic, which was so good in the first game. The entire game was built around it, and they replaced it with one enemy type. Well, one major enemy gang, I should say, Cell. You don't kill any generals. You don't even kill the leader. You kill her in a cutscene, I think, at the end of the game. But you run around, you capture supply points in this game. You don't take down any generals, no kingpins. You do the sunburst thing, and you do the freak breaches. That's it. I can't understand why in the hell Ruffian, the developer for this game, decided to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, when the wheel wasn't broken. It worked just fine. Crackdown 1 was a lot of fun, so why the hell did they change the formula? This was why I hated, after playing through this, you know, and revisiting Crackdown 2, I remember this was the #1 issue, why I hated this game so much. And why I say, during my playthrough of this, I think it's in the very last video, the one you're watching now, most people hate Crackdown 3 the most. I would argue that. I would say that Crackdown 3 sticks to the original formula a hell of a lot more than this one does. And if a lot of these people defending Crackdown 2 would actually go back and play the first 3 games, or I should say the only 3 games, in order, they might find themselves agreeing with me. -12. Why are there turrets? This game is about fast-paced combat. Obviously, if you hop into a turret, you're now a stationary target. In the first game, you jumped around and moved around, which I have a complaint to add here, which I didn't put on the list, but this is tied into it. Turrets just make you a static target, so why add them? It doesn't fit the gameplay. I mean, it doesn't fit the blueprint, so to speak, that the first game laid out so well. Another problem I have is when you walk in on an enemy, your movement slows in this game. In the first game, you could sit there and do like 360s and serpentines around your opponents. It was so much fun to watch them try to keep a beat on you when you're running around as fast as Superman. You can't do that in this game. You slow down when you walk onto a target. I don't understand why. Bad choice. -13. Chaseable orbs are gay. They're very gay. In fact, they're so gay that they're gayer than I thought they would be. Because if it's not bad enough chasing in a really fast-moving agility orb from building to building, which you could just fall off, and talk about putting something in the game that's meant to get under the character's skin. There's also driving chaseable orbs in this game. I came across one at one point, and I had an agency vehicle on hand, so I thought I might as well try to get this. I approach it, and the voice of the agency says, "You're not in the right vehicle to get this orb." I'm like, well then fuck your stupid orbs. This shit's gay. I'm not doing it. -13. And I generally write the negatives, starting from the bottom of the paper going up, so the ones closer to the bottom are the ones that I think of first. But no gangs, or one gang, no generals, no kingpins. Why change a great system? I already touched upon this. You had a winning formula with the first game that Crackdown 3 thankfully revived. But why reinvent a wheel if it's not broken? -15. The new targeting system targets non-enemies too much. There's a little bit more nuance to this. The new targeting system allows you to hold down the left trigger, and usually once you kill an enemy, it'll lock onto something that's nearby. That's very convenient. However, what's not convenient is that the new targeting system, like you just saw there, I killed one enemy and then it locked onto what was right beside it, which happened to be an explosive barrel. Once you get into some of the more dangerous gunfights in this game where people got grenade launchers, rocket launchers everywhere, and you're trying to get a quick beat on an enemy, locking onto an explosive barrel or a car or something else in the environment is not helpful whatsoever. In fact, it'll get you killed quite a lot. Got me killed a lot. I don't know why they thought this was a good addition. It's not. -16. Second to last one. The collectibles are unwelcome. The ones that I'm talking about are like news clippings, just random filler content to try to inflate the game time without really adding much to it. Some of them provide a bit of a backstory, but if you're not interested in the backstory, or if you're not a completionist, then none of this adds any value to the game. I didn't feel the collectibles meant anything. You don't get anything except for an achievement if you care about that. You don't get like any new weapons unlocked or anything like that if you collect all the, let's say, the whistleblower tapes, as far as I know. The last negative, -17. The tutorial is unwelcome and bad. The first game didn't have a tutorial. You just go out into the world and start kicking ass. In this game, they felt the need to throw what I would argue was a very restrictive tutorial into it, and it wasn't very fun. You also have the voice of the agency berating you the entire time, which didn't add to it. I hated the tutorial in this game. I felt that it was totally unnecessary. It's not like Crackdown's a very complicated game. You go out, you shoot stuff, left trigger locks on, right trigger shoots, you can throw grenades, jump, It's not complicated. You do not need a tutorial. So overall, what did I score this game? 5 different options. There's great, which I've only given to a few games like Batman Arkham Knight, Elden Ring. There's good, which is what a lot of my games are. There's average, which is what most of my games are. There's bad, which quite a few games have been getting a bad rating lately. And then there's terrible, which for terrible, I don't recommend them to anyone, just don't even bother. This falls into the bad category. Crackdown 2 is definitely bad. Now you might think with 17 negatives, 2 pluses, and 2 subjectives that the score would be worse, but the game's not, I mean, it works. I didn't have any crashes. There wasn't anything that really stopped me from progressing till the end of the game. Nothing in this game was so bad, I mean, boring, but it wasn't so bad that it just stopped progression, which that's generally what it takes for it to fall into terrible category. So there it is, Crackdown 2. My rating, bad. Later on, I'm going to get into Crackdown 3 and do a how bad is it on that series, because 3 is generally the one that all the players hate, but I get the feeling that I'm not going to be rating Crackdown 3 as bad.